I'm Ken Stevens, the historian and curator here at the College Football Hall of Fame, and welcome to another edition of Curator's Corner. The last time we met, we talked about All-America teams. I said how that was probably the most frequently asked question of me by people who call and send me emails here at the College Football Hall of Fame. Was my brother, father, uncle, grandfather, was he an All-America football player or not? The thing I'm secondly most get inquiries about is how many national championships did my school win, or what school has the most national championships. Unfortunately, that is an answer that is very open to interpretation because there is no official national champion. Even today, even when they award this beautiful crystal trophy, there is still not an official national champion. And you only have to go back to the 2003 season to understand that. The BCS calculations were much different in 2003 than they are now. But in that season, the #1 team going into the bowl games was Southern California, #2 was Oklahoma, and #3 was LSU. And because the calculations were much different, Southern California did not participate in the BCS championship game, where Oklahoma and LSU did. LSU beat Oklahoma, and then they won this portion of the national championship, which is given by the coaches. The writers, however, voted on their own, and they voted for Southern California as the national championship. The coaches trophy, which is this trophy here, is obviously voted on by the coaches, and they are required to vote for the winner of the BCS champion as the national champion. It's almost sort of like an election in communist Russia, where you are predetermined as to who you're going to vote for. It's kind of funny when everyone is so interested in national champions these days, but it's kind of interesting to know that in college football history, no one was really cared or really interested in the national champion until 1926. And in 1926, there was a professor I think it was an economics professor at the University of Illinois by the name of Frank Dickinson. And he came up with a mathematical formula to rate college football teams. And so he applied this formula, and he named a national champion for 1926. And it got a lot of interest and a lot of acclaim, and people were very interested in it. So much so that Newt Rockne, the coach at Notre Dame, asked Dickinson to go back 2 seasons and do calculations again to recalculate the 1924 and 1925 season. And he did so. Mainly because Rockne had an undefeated team, and he knew that the calculations were probably very favorable to the team, and so he did that, and Dickinson's calculations came out that Notre Dame was a 1924 national champion. Shortly after Dickinson started doing these mathematical calculations, several other people started doing them as well. There was the Boand ratings, the Dunkel ratings, and the Williamson ratings were pretty much the prime ratings in the 1930s and 1940s for determining national champions. In the middle of the 1930s, the Associated Press started conducting their weekly writers' poll. And that really was pretty much the Cadillac of college football ratings until 1950, when there was also a coaches' poll. And so these 2 polls pretty much determined who the national champions were from the 1930s on. Another thing that is vastly different about these college football polls then as opposed to now, they stopped at the end of the regular season. They did not include the bowl games. Bowl games were thought of as much differently then as they are now. Some teams refused to go to bowl games. Other conferences like the Big Ten had rules where you could not repeat. If you went 1 year, you could not go back the 2nd year. It was quite often that teams would refuse bowl bids. So the idea of going to a bowl game was much different then as it is now. It was thought of as more of a reward. Obviously the teams tried, and actually, it wasn't as an exhibition game, but back in that era, they felt whoever was the best team at the end of the regular season as the best team, that was your national champion. That sort of changed in the mid-1960s. In 1964, Alabama played Texas. Alabama was the #1 team in the country, and they played Texas in the Orange Bowl and lost on the same day that Arkansas, the #2 team, another undefeated team, played in, I believe, the Cotton Bowl, I believe, and they won that game. And the Football Writers Association, in a post-bowl poll, named Arkansas as the #1 team. Because of that, beginning in 1965, with a few exceptions along the way early on, the bowls did count. And so pretty much from 1965 on, again with a few exceptions, which I won't go into detail on, the bowl games really did count as to who really was the national champion. As I said earlier, much of these national championships are largely under personal interpretation. The reason for that interpretation is what I refer to as retro rankings. I said before that Dickinson began his rankings in 1926 and then went back and recalculated the 1924 and 1925 seasons. Since all these mathematical polls have come out, even today, there are individuals and there are mathematical formulas that have gone back into history and recalculated the results of these games, either by score or just by wins and losses, and have determined retro national champions based on their formulas that they have created today. There's a lot of interpretation as to which of these formulas are valid and which are not, and obviously there's a main problem because these are rankings and national championships that have been awarded, 60, 70, 80 years after the actual fact, and how legitimate are all these claims? So some schools have a very liberal interpretation as to which of these calculations and who of these boards and people who are naming these retro national champions, which of these are legit. And some schools have a very conservative attitude as to which of these selectors are legitimate. So they have schools that are applying two different standards as to who they feel are the true national champion. So we really don't have a true consensus national champion each year as we do with, say, All-America teams, where we have a consensus All-America teams. And that really is the crux of why there's so much interpretation between schools as to how many national championships each team has. So to all the Alabama and Notre Dame fans who keep bothering me as to which school has the most national champions, I'll finally give you the answer. The answer is Yale.